So one thing I didn't anticipate with Outchasers is how difficult the art direction would be. But basically when we started out, Nick and I would go on Pinterest and just find pictures of awesome robots and pin those. And we just had boards and boards of cool art. And we went back and forth, with the overall direction that we wanted. And, I took a lot of inspiration from, games that we had played, Magic and then, Star Wars, of course, and, Mech Warrior and Battletech. And then there's a game that I was really inspired by called Magi Nation, and this artist, Matt Holmberg, which he actually has a similar style to Brett, and I really like it. It's cartoony and fun, but it's got these kind of warped proportions that we also have, a little bit bigger heads, a little bit cartoony, but also, a little bit more serious. In the original, game design document, we were talking about making some of those, anthropomorphic, like half elephant, half people, and weird stuff like that would fit more with like a Magi Nation or like a Matt Holmberg art style. And eventually Nick convinced me to not do that, which I think it's a better thing for. I still think it'd be fun to have half elephant people fighting giant robots, but maybe that'll be my next project. From there, we had to talk with Brett and come up with our ideas before we could, really have solid concepts. And so what we did was just went through sort of a history of each people, each group that we were going and describing. And we definitely had some weird details that we came up with. And this is more of a, have to come up with the lore to inspire the visuals. And some of that has been left behind, thankfully. It wasn't good enough, and some of it really influenced where we are with the characters. We had originally talked about the world, all three groups of people being on the same planet, and they're all kind of, figuring out their lives after this big event. And so you'll see that the pilots with the red color, like Kehu and Hexia, they both have this darker gray kind of metallic skin, and they have almost like metal veins kind of showing. And our thought there was that after this sort of catastrophic event, that they were forced underground, and they ended up adapting to darkness and adapting to this harsh environment that was very metallic and kind of absorbing that into themselves. And that sort of led to their faction identity being a little bit more desperate. So the equipments aren't really attached to the people anymore because the players use all three types of equipments. But you'll see that in the design of the cards where they're very aggressive, but they're also, and very poor defensive cards. But sometimes they're so aggressive that they cost the user something. And that was kind of coming from the story standpoint that their people were somewhat desperate after this event and just willing to do whatever it took, even if it cost them something. So Quantum is our green faction, and we actually have some concepts that I'll show you where they're just completely different characters, these kind of like blonde, blue-eyed people. And our original thoughts with them, we were thinking that they were really technologically advanced to the point where they're kind of mixing with machine, kind of, they want to have a unified consciousness, which I'm not sure if that's really what the story is now, but you can, do with that what you will. But you can see it in their design in these kind of really advanced looking mechs that are kind of almost fluid, and that they're not so industrial, they're more, smooth and elegant. And one thing that was a pillar of our design for them was it's a really deep concept called floaty things. And so we just wanted things floating around them somehow, because it looks really advanced and cool to have that. So that was, thankfully Brett really could translate that into a visual idea that looked good. If we look at the other faction, the blue guys that would become, the tectonic equipment type, but it's Vey and Hagar. Our thought behind them was that they live in sort of a really industrial society, and that they're kind of scrappy and just like they'd have dirty mechs that kind of were built in a series, like in a giant factory that just pumped them out, and then these kind of battle-hardened commanders and stuff, and then so that's Hagar, the battle-hardened commander kind of guy, and then we have Vey, who's kind of the new recruit, but who's really tough and looking to like prove herself. And so one of the things we had originally started with was kind of a medieval influence, where the mechs would have like shields and swords and kind of more melee weapons and almost look like giant robot knights. And those ended up getting scrapped as we went. I think it was something that we couldn't really express to Brett, and we couldn't really find something that we agreed on that we all liked that was in that style. So we ended up kind of scrapping it and going with more of, and now they're more of like the classic mech warrior kind of mech that's, looks like a standard, almost American style mech. So there was a time where we were really desperate to find a name for the game, and we were just asking everyone, what they thought, if they had any ideas, and we ended up asking one of our friends, and he suggested the name Tex-Mex, with spelled Texmechs, and that was just stuck with me for so long, and I thought it was so funny. And I was thinking maybe we should just redo the art as like Wild West cowboys, and we'd have a Voltron of like an Old West train and be the mechs, and it just sounded so cool. So maybe that'll be the next version of Outchasers. It'll be Outchasers Tex-Mex, but so far we haven't made any progress there, but it's definitely something I'm thinking about. In working with Brett and working on concepts, the process really started with just really rough sketches. And what we'd do is we'd describe what we were imagining, and then just give him whatever sort of styles, and then maybe some influences. Well, this kind of looks like that from that show or whatever. And then he would just do quick sketches. And this got to the point where he would sketch tiny little drawings just across an 8.5 by 11, and we put numbers on it all. I'd be like, I like the shoulders of 5, I like the knees of 10, and it was really like that. And we were picking pieces of these robots as we go through things over and over, and we did the same thing with the characters, the people. We would do, he would do costumes first. So he would just draw out costumes and costumes and costumes, and we have these really cool concepts of like 25 or 30 different costumes that fit in each of the groups of people that we had kind of come up with, that are really awesome. And then so we'd pick one of those, and then he would take that to a bigger illustration, and then from there that was generally black and white, and then he would, once we were good with that, that piece and that composition, then he'd go in deeper and do all the color. And originally the cards had backgrounds to them, these like darker colors and kind of splotchy kind of almost environments to it. And then we ended up scrapping all that and going with a really white background. And partially, honestly, that's to save some time art-wise, some money art-wise. But it's also really served us well as a style with just trying to be minimal. And I think what we've come up with has looked really cool. But there was a version where I ended up doing the cards split with their color. That looked really cool. But either way, I'm really happy with where we are now with that stuff. So the last thing I really did with art direction was developing the Kickstarter video, which was a huge process and a huge project. And so that started with the idea that I wanted to do a little quick animation of the characters, which is super expensive and scary and hard. So what we settled on was to do some frames. And so that way we could, not spend all the money in the world, but we'd still do something that, tells a story, and, shows what Outchasers is visually and doesn't just tell you. So what we did was we storyboarded the whole thing and talked it through, and then I ended up just working with After Effects and animating all the frames moving, and then all the cards moving, and showing an actual game being played, sort of in space, like as if the mechs were really there. and it's really awesome. I'm really excited about it. It's really cool to see, you know, the things that are created in your imagination come to life, even if it's somewhat you know, slow frames. It's not full animation. It's still pretty awesome to see it. One of our bigger struggles was music, and sound was something we ended up skipping just because I would have loved to have some sound effects. It's just, you know, such a big project, and sound design for sound effects is just so out of my wheelhouse that I just decided not to get too deep into that. But the original track we had done, I have a really awesome friend who is doing music for us named Rich Ferens, and he is just amazing. And I had sort of set the tone for this and asked him to do, you know, something melancholy, something lonely in space. And he wrote a really killer track for it, but it just felt really sad. And I was kind of feeling like, I don't want people to be sad playing Outchasers. I don't want this video to make you feel sad, you know, or lonely, or like you're the only one out in space, you know, trying to, you know, live or die in this giant robot fight. I want people to be excited about it. So we ended up redoing the track, and now it has some of that minery feel to it, where it's a little bit lonely, but it's also upbeat and exciting and like actiony. So I'm really excited about where the music is now, and it really helps the whole thing come together, and just to make for a really exciting Kickstarter video. And I'm really excited to share that with everyone watching really soon. I hope they like it as much as I do. I think it's really awesome. I'm really excited about it.
My name is Neinburg. I was the artist on Outchasers. I, in the past, have been a freelance concept artist and worked in video games. From what I remember, I think the designers originally came to me and just, you know, gave me the overall concept of it and a quick run through of kind of how the game played. And of course it was robots, which who doesn't love robots, so in. And then we kind of tossed real rough ideas back and forth. And in fact, I think we actually started with a lot of costume designs at first, just kind of trying to get the styles of the different factions together and trying to sort of understand how this group works with this group, but trying to get an overall aesthetic of the game. And we would just do huge sheets of, you know, 50 to 100 different thumbnail designs, and I would kind of go by with my red pen and circle ones that got approved, or we liked this little bit of this and didn't like this, and just do it again and again and again until we kind of slowly started to refine down to what would eventually become the overall aesthetic. And then we kind of branch off and do different robots of this or costume designs of this, and yeah, just slow refinement eventually came to final drawings and the actual look of the game. When we first started, the original names for the 3 different factions were just rock, paper, scissors out of just necessity of having a name to talk about them. And both rock and scissors had a pretty tangible feel to them. We kind of knew the direction they wanted to go, rock being kind of more militaristic in more of a traditional sense, and scissors being kind of Mad Maxy, I guess. All of which were kind of easily identifiable stereotypes that, you know, even if we didn't go exactly that direction, we knew what we were talking about. But paper was kind of just, in my mind, it was kind of War of the Worlds sci-fi, and that one specifically ended up being the hardest to kind of clamp down as far as getting all 3 minds melded in a way that we were all speaking the same language. And so we kind of, we started kind of War of the Worlds-y, and maybe started to dip into little other bits of, you know, other sci-fi tropes, and took little bits from this and that, and just kind of meandered along a path, which is always the most difficult way to do it. The ideal way to do any design is just to immediately be like, yeah, I want Blade Runner from this scene and that, and you're like, oh yeah, I'll rip that off, that's great. But any great design, you don't do that, and so, yeah, paper, oddly, is probably one of the ones I'm more happy with because it's got its, you know, it has a very specific aesthetic to it. But it was definitely the most difficult to get there and get something that we were all like, yes, that one's it. But I think we finally got there, and yeah. yeah, as a concept artist, you're really just dealing with communication. And so I'm constantly looking for just tons of ideas to throw out and just see what sticks and more or less give, in this case, the three of us, but sometimes it's, huge rooms of people, and giving everybody involved something to catch on to and talk about, a starting point to get the conversation going. And then once you start dialing in the design, obviously that gets more and more specific, and but especially in the beginning, you're just throwing out anything. It's funny that you mentioned shields, because shields just is not something that registers to me, again, because I was just throwing out tons of things. But in retrospect, yeah, we did keep trying to get shields to work. And I guess the idea of these like knightly big robots with shields and swords it's cool. But again, there is that sci-fi, like, where does this fit in, especially when one group is, kind of modern military and has giant plasma railguns or whatever. How do sort of these pseudo knights work into that? I think we got some stuff that was, it worked. It wasn't that. It wasn't shields and knights. But we've got kind of cool bladed weapons and sort of a melee, brutish look to some of them. That we wanted it so bad, and we finally got it. But it was definitely more of a struggle than it seemed like it should have been to get that stuff in and get it to look like it fit with everything else. Okay, yeah, when we started with, I can't remember, I think we probably started with Hexia. There's just something about the way that whole faction worked that we kind of just immediately knew that it just felt melee, and it felt kind of brutal, and there was a very feral feel to them that we wanted to capture. And in that sense, we just immediately went to kind of these spiky whips, and their clothes were just ripped and hanging off of them, and they just pieced them back together, and bits of shrapnel some were put on their bodies, some were built into weapons. And so I think both of those pilots, but probably to begin with Hexia more, just had this brutal melee feel to it, and it was one of those things that just immediately clicked. That was exactly what we wanted. It was just the right amount of different from the rest of the other pilots. My favorite piece, I'm sort of a concept artist. Like, I'm not an illustrator. I really relish the bits where you're knee deep in each other's thoughts and working on oh, does this work, and this doesn't work, and I like that, and so to me, all the little rough scribbles that nobody ever sees are my favorite pieces, because those are the hard work, right? Especially in if you see art of books, those books never reflect all the minuscule details that were put into something way before the nice pretty drawings. The nice pretty drawings in a lot of cases are actually done after the fact, or very close to the end of everything being realized. And those are done with the intention of looking pretty, and not with the intention of communicating ideas. And to me, the communication is the really beautiful part of specifically game making. Because games are one of those things where you almost can never be by yourself and make a good game. Because it's a social product, and so if the process isn't at least somewhat social, you just don't capture what it is you're going for from the beginning. I suppose some people can get lucky, but I'm definitely not one of those people, and so I definitely thrive off of the, if not communicative, at least the social aspect of making art. Maybe we'll be lucky and be able to see some of those drawings, but they're all scribbles. None of them are pretty. They're cool. I don't know. They're raw and undoctored, and they've got red lines all over them, and I've filled in little things, and I don't know. That to me is a very human part of making art. When you see IR scans of Da Vinci and they layer back 9 layers, and you can see the original sketch that looks nothing like it, and you see his fixing things and then doing a grayscale over it. That to me is way cooler than the finished painting, which has been refined and refined and refined. Yeah, that's the answer to that one. Yeah, one thing I really like about the game that wasn't immediately apparent to me working with, because again, I immediately went to, all right, robots and sci-fi, and I get to make awesome costume designs, was the actual design of the game as it's displayed on a table when you're playing it. Most games, for obvious reasons, have really cool little bits of art on the card, but if you look at the game as a whole, it's just kind of lots of little bits of art on cards. This game is it's very structured in a colorful way, so you can immediately see what's going on, and there's big blocks of color. It's so obvious but simple in a way that is really new and cool, and compelling when you're playing up against another person and they have kind of sort of the reverse image of it. But you can really easily visualize the mech and all these bits of armor and sort of, even though you're not really seeing how your specific mech in this game looks, you can abstractly really visualize the differences in it. I just thought that was a really cool component to something that you wouldn't normally see in a dueling game. Yeah, I think to begin with, the backgrounds are much more painterly, and that's part of just concepting and making sure that everything, like I'm just going a mile a minute and just putting in colors. But I, probably in the background, without like saying it, Coop was always just like, how about we simplify this? And I mean, as far as it being a game, and we had a fairly clean look, and we did have to kind of define whether or not we were going to have a clean look to begin with. But again, coming back to the visual of the actual game on the table, it does have a very clean, large blocks of color, primary look to it. And kind of along those themes and be able to fit in with all that, I think Coop kept going back to this other piece that I'd done for something completely unrelated, or even like just like cutting out the picture that I did and just like putting it in, like, maybe we should do something like this, Brett. Yeah, that's great, I'll do this or whatever, and then color it up again. And then eventually through refinement, maybe I slowly caught on to the idea of simplifying it. And once we kind of tried that and simplified it, the temptation there was just to kind of sci-fi it up and give it something extra. And we, again, and just toyed with tons and tons of things, and eventually one kind of stuck and felt right. And that was just sort of, I don't know if we have a word for it. It was just kind of cutting up blocks of color into these like sort of simple stripes, just geometric shapes, in order to not take away from what's otherwise a very painterly, cartoony style. And so writing that line between cartoony and painterly can be tough, and if you have an overly complex background, especially for a tiny card, it's really easy to lose important detail real quick. So yeah, the final result was sort of a mesh of necessity and just visual interest that went with the rest of the game. Again, I'm a kind of a concept artist and not an illustrator, but I was really pleasantly surprised doing the boxes. I don't know if I just really liked the characters at that point, or I don't know. It was a lot more fun than I expected it to be. Maybe I just had like the kid in me was just like, oh yeah, I'm making a card game box, this is gonna be great. But those were pretty effortless. Obviously we had like specifics we wanted to hit, we needed to have a character, and there's all the like technical things about eyeline and all that stuff, but none of those seemed like, in a lot of pieces, it's really easy to get bogged down with that stuff and just all the fun gets taken out of it, and that was not the case at all with these. They just sort of effortlessly, I was just in my own little world, like, oh yeah, and there's gonna be a little crater in the back, and here's this guy's getting blown out, making spaceship noises in the back, and yeah, so that was me at 2 a.m, just having a hoot to myself. Yeah, and a lot of the later stuff in the game, the more refined paintings, kind of have all had that quality. There's not, the world's cool, but it's still open-ended. I mean, it's defined, but it's not limiting, and it's just a really fun place for an artist to visit, I guess, in that sense. Icons and any sort of interface related, those are kind of like, artists that do that are kind of the unsung heroes of the game world. It's so hard and it looks so easy, and And maybe why it looks so easy is because it's easy to get 80% there. But that last 90% is just so difficult. And that last 90% is what makes or breaks a usable game. I mean, you can, and when you're test playing all this stuff, you have like little filled in, scrolled in, whatever, and they work, and then you get used to it, and then you forget that like other people who've played or playing the game for the first time aren't used to like looking up here for their numbers or whatever. And so it's just such a, you have to be able to like look at things in a different way every single time, which is so difficult. And so it's probably not an exaggeration to say that we spent more time on individual icons and how things worked. And it's the most frustrating work because like it works, but it doesn't work, and why isn't it working? And yeah, we just spent so much time refining things and getting that perfect meld of this fits our product. It's got a good feel to it. Gameplay works. It's legible, and I like it. And that I like it part took us so long. I felt like we hit things that worked, but we needed to get something else into it. And how do we get that in it without screwing it up? Especially with like the equipment cards, we had this really great design style that required the cards to fit a certain way, but aesthetically they weren't doing what we wanted them to, but they were almost there. And how much do we scrap that or not? And at the end of the day, I think we just got lucky with keeping everybody's kind of eye on the prize and trying enough things that we just stumbled upon what really worked great. As far as individual icons go, I can't really remember any one that was super more difficult than the other, but to be honest, I kind of hate them all. I don't hate where they ended up. I think they ended up really great. It's very cognitive work. It's not like painting. You can go back and you put on an audiobook or, you know, jam out and just get going and get lost in yourself. Icon work is just never like that. As much as you want it to be like that, or you want to get to the stage where, all right, I've done all the hard work, now I can just work on it. It's never like that. You always are thinking, and you're always thinking, how can I make this better? How can I continue to like this but make it more functional? And functional is always like that key word that's just like, it's not functional! And there's like this functional goblin over your head that's just yelling at you and screaming in your ear, and it's terrible. I hate that goblin. It's a sweet analogy. Yeah, no, the charge icon's a really good example. It's just, it's such an important part of the game, and it has to have a certain style and flavor to it. When we first started with it, it was much more painterly and kind of, it still had an icon quality, but it was much more akin to like an item, I guess. But then as we started referencing the charge in other cards, you know, we realized they're going to be this big and in the corner, and it just had to be much more graphic and much more, it kind of had to fit more of the aesthetic that we had in the backgrounds and less the aesthetic of the characters, which again had been split due to like visual interest as far as we have this kind of cartoony look and it needs to have something good to stand on the back of. And we at some point we just kind of woke up and realized we were going with the wrong one. We were trying to make the icons kind of cartoony and like the characters, and it needed to be more of the gameplay style. And so we started refining that and came across something that we liked, and then we had to again just like make it fit with the rest of the game better and keep going and going, and we just meandered forever, and I don't know, we've got like just a couple dozen designs of it, and even then, you know, even now we're still playing with it. Trying to make something that replicates well, but still represents the game, because as gameplay changes as well, it becomes more or less a part of the game and more important, and the direction that we're going now is much more central to the overall aesthetic and the overall gameplay. Trying to make those line up, it can be really difficult sometimes for no apparent reason. For the Kickstarter video and the story behind it, God, it would have been great to have just like solid animation the whole way through. And I don't, at least in my mind, that was never really going to happen. Maybe in other people's minds it was. I don't know. I don't remember how much the voice of doom I was in that case. I've done a lot of storyboards, and storyboards too are just one of those things that they're they're exhausting because you have to think so much, and while you're a storyboard artist, you're the director and the DP, and you're lighting everything and then moving everything and worrying about blocking, and oh no, did I forget this way, and so you're the entire crew, and so it's so much work, and it's only fun when you finish it and you get to like read through it. And again, in this case, it was a little bit more collaborative, I suppose, than it tends to be, which for me at least puts the fun back into it a little bit. When there's somebody else on the other side getting excited about seeing a story come alive, that kind of, you can't help but get a little bit of giddy about that. And so this one was more effortless, and again, cool to see these characters actually, again, it's a game. In my mind, I had all these stories and these characters, but there wasn't really anything tangible gameplay-wise, and a lot of that exists so that individual players can kind of get in the shoes of the mech pilots and such, but in my mind, these were all fully fleshed out characters, and it was fun to show other people that a little bit and kind of give them a glimpse into how I felt like characters would react, and not that it's like a really big detailed story, but there's all these just little bits of personality you can finally inject into these characters, and see it, if not in full 3D animated explosive visuals, at least in storyboards, which is, I think, to me, the perfect meld of, we have these really great ideas, we really want to show this off, we don't have the money or time, and we really need to get back to work. So this is what you get, world. That's how I feel about storyboarding. Whenever the designers or everybody else has a little playtest going on, I always really lament the fact that I'm just like, they're always at a place where I'm stuck in my own booth as an artist, and they're having fun and literally playing games, and I'm just selling things, and my soul is just leaving my body. So I'm really excited now as we finally get to the completion of it, and it's solid enough that people are really getting the flavor of everything. It's going to be really fun to see people playing it without thinking, what can we do better constantly? Because whenever I play the game, I mean, it's fun, but it's so hard to turn off that artist switch and not be thinking, oh, like, they're taking too long to read this card, like, what can I do to make that better? Or, these colors didn't come across the way I wanted them to, or any of those. It's going to be so, I'm hoping it's going to be so liberating to just watch the game being played and watch smiles on people's faces. And because at the end of the day, the game is really fun, and it's always a little exciting when at the end of the day you've worked so hard on a project and it's just fun. It's and that doesn't happen as often as it feels like it should happen. And when it does happen, it's electrifying, and it kind of reminds you why you're in the industry at all. I love games, and all the people that I work with love games, but there's just so much work. It's so much work to make a game. And you can kind of get lost in the forest a little bit of that, and it's good to finally get out of the clearing and watch other people enjoying it. And it kind of feels like you just sort of wake up and like, oh, we did it. We're done. This is great. Everybody likes it. Sweet. I am legitimately excited about it being out and seeing people play it for the first time and enjoy something that we've put so much blood and sweat into and refined in a way that none of those people are ever going to recognize, hopefully, anyway, because they shouldn't. I mean, that was our job, is to make all of their headaches go away and solve all those problems in the first place. And so yeah, hopefully everything goes smooth and everybody really enjoys it.
So I know we talked a little bit about it last week, but to say thank you for everyone who's watched all these videos and been a fan of Outchasers for a while now. We're giving away a concept art book that has all of our concept art in it, and all the cool process shots of Brett's work, throughout the last, 2 years of work. So they can download that in the link below, and it's totally free. I think it's really awesome, and I'm excited about it. So for all you guys watching, I'd really appreciate it if you guys would do me a solid and share this video, and if you have any questions or comments, let me know in the comments below or on any of our social media pages. I'd love to hear from you guys.
We're doing a Kickstarter. Please give us your money.
This is
I need to eat. I'm so hungry. Why is it that goblins and orcs are sometimes the same species and sometimes not the same species? That drives me crazy. Cooper is the greatest designer ever. Everything he says is gold. This game is great. Buy our game. It's so fun. I love robots. Kids, do you like robots? I like robots. Let's play robots together. It came out across more as a creepy guy in a van with candy than I was going from like a Mattel
90s
Hot Wheels 90s commercial. Yeah, I didn't. I need to do some research on that.